So I saw this pop up on the Canucks subreddit, and I thought it was an interesting enough discussion. Also, this is a great opportunity for us to continually use the gameplay that I recorded once upon a time of NHL 26. The new game is coming out soon, and admittedly, I haven't touched 26 in so long. All this gameplay is old. So, yeah, we might need to get rid of this before the release of the new game, if I even buy the new game. It feels like a violation to not, but hey, life goes on, and sometimes you just stop buying the new video game in the series of yearly releases, especially when the new game's promised game mode that everybody has been wanting for years doesn't actually come fully complete. That's a video for another day. Anyways, let's talk about this post made on the Canucks subreddit asked out by Gretz182. They asked on the sub yesterday, acquiring more first-round draft picks. With the 2027 draft projected to being strong, I think it's important the Canucks get 1 to 2 more firsts for the next few years. What are some potential trades the Canucks can make now or in the future for more firsts? And if you read the comments, you take a look at what's going on in the discourse over there, there are, generally speaking, maybe 1 or 2 names that are tossed around as being potential first-round draft pick caliber players that the Canucks could reasonably trade in the next little while. You've got Filip Hronek, whom I'd say is the obvious one. Everybody's talking about him and whether or not his future, long-term, is going to be with Vancouver. And then I'm also going to toss in Marco Rossi. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some other conversations that are discussed as well. Could Jake DeBrusk get a first-round pick? Could Thatcher Demko get a first-round pick? What about Elias Pettersson? Yada, yada, yada. And then there's the old Raymond Ballard in a second that continuously gets brought up. But either way, when it comes to the Canucks, I'd say that Rossi and Hronek are like the only 2 guys that you could reasonably say could get traded and who could fetch the team a first in the process. Elias Pettersson, it's like, okay, if he gets traded, you're probably looking at a first-round pick coming back, but that's really dependent on whichever team is acquiring him, and then you're also talking about salary retention, and then you're talking about the no move, and whether or not Pettersson would actually be interested in getting traded in the first place. You could very well say the same thing about Filip Hronek. The fact is, though, we've heard a lot about Filip Hronek being the most valuable Vancouver Canucks player in terms of trade value. But then again, it's like, hey, all indications so far, throughout this offseason and throughout the entire time Ryan Johnson has been the Vancouver Canucks GM, all indications are that Filip Hronek actually is willing to play in Vancouver, and he wants to be a Canuck, and he wants to be a leadership figure. He wants to be a guy to help lead this younger core into the next generation. And then, of course, you have the conversations of him potentially being the next captain, which, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not too sure if I think that that's the best thing to do long-term, but in the short term, I could see the vision a little bit, I guess. Filip Hronek, though, obviously the best Vancouver Canuck, consistency-wise, role-wise, at this moment in time. Is he necessarily the best player to be manning the top power play? If you evaluate it from a pure talent perspective, probably, but is he the guy that you want to be manning the top power play from a developmental point of view at this stage? You could also very well say no. And I'd argue that Zeev Buium is a guy that you would rather see in that top power play role, mostly because it is better for his development. If Filip Hronek continuously takes number 1 power play time away from the development of Zeev Buium, who is 20, you might not necessarily be looking at the best sort of plan for Buium and what he could potentially become. Like, Thomas Drance made this argument on one of the older episodes of Halford and Bruff before Sportsnet 650 got removed from the air, obviously, that if Zeev Buium isn't able to get that top power play production and he's not able to consistently be a factor on the top unit, you might be looking at more of a Sam Girard type of guy rather than a Quinn Hughes or a Cale Makar kind of guy. The difference in how much this guy is able to improve could very well be directly tied to how much power play time he gets in the immediate future during these developmental years. And Filip Hronek's presence on the team potentially makes that more difficult. I don't know, it's just kind of a thought that it's been floating around in my brain the past little while. Filip Hronek could get the Canucks a first-round pick easy, especially compared to the Bessers and the DeBrusks and the Pedersens. Like, all these guys have some caveats to them. Filip Hronek, the only caveat is that no move, but then again, you think about it, hey, he's making $7.25 million, he's like a consistent 40 to 50 point defenseman, he's good, and he'll be very valuable. The other guy that I think can reasonably get the Vancouver Canucks a first-round draft pick is Marco Rossi, who is 24, so obviously you would think, okay, 24 is young enough as the Vancouver Canucks build into this long-term vision. What, 8 years later, Marco Rossi's going to be 32 years old, Braden Coots is going to be 27. These guys are all relatively in the same bubble, so why not think of Rossi as a longer-term guy? And while that is fair, you could also make the opposing argument that says Marco Rossi at 24, making $5 million a year till the end of 2028, if he is able to continuously produce in the strong way that he was at the end of this previously completed season, Marco Rossi could actually be one of the top trade chips the Canucks have. This is a player that if he were to be available on the market and he continuously produces in the way that he had last year in Minnesota and then in this most recent season with Vancouver, I would not be surprised if an NHL team, especially one that's more privy to giving smaller guys more prominent roles, I'm thinking like Carolina or Montreal, teams that are not afraid to give guys like Stankoven and Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki more of a spotlight. If Marco Rossi is available, I would think this guy fetches a pretty big haul. I mean, 60-point centers are kind of rare, especially ones that are still kind of developing and still getting to a higher spot in their career. Marco Rossi ain't done yet. And I've always been a fan of this guy ever since he was draft eligible, ever since the Minnesota Wild took him in a pretty late spot, in my opinion, in the 2020 draft, 9th overall. I always thought that Rossi was like a top 5 talent. That only went so low because he was 5'9" at the time. But Rossi, he is young enough where you could debate. He fits in a Vancouver Canucks rebuild, but into the next little while, if you're able to trade Rossi away for a first-round draft pick and a really great prospect, sometimes quantity is better than quality, especially when trying to project where your team could be in the long-term future. And also, if you think about it, if Braden Coots and Caleb Malhotra pan out to their potential, and Elias Pettersson is still on the books, what, are you going to play Marco Rossi on the 4th line? Is Pettersson going to be on the 4th line? I don't know. There are a number of conversations to have about that, and PD being signed long-term ultimately is so much of a hindrance / issue that I think it's going to bleed into all the conversations we have about centers with the Canucks over the next few years. That is, of course, unless Pettersson just straight up fixes himself and is able to produce 80-something plus points consistently till the end of his contract, which I'm not too optimistic he'll be able to do, but you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Either way, who else do you think the Vancouver Canucks could trade in order to get a first-round draft pick? What are your thoughts on the players on the team right now? Obviously, like, Caleb Malhotra just went 3rd overall. If they were to trade him, he'd get a first, no problem, but obviously they're not going to trade that guy. Amongst reasonable trade candidates for this team, who do you think the Canucks could get a first-round pick out of? Let me know in the comment section down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Sign on. And bye.